August 15th, 1971, a Sunday evening. President Richard Nixon interrupted television programming to make an announcement about the dollar and gold. Most viewers didn't understand what they were hearing. Some assumed it was temporary. Nixon himself used that word. But what happened that night wasn't temporary. It was permanent, and it changed the nature of money itself. For 25 years, the global financial system had operated under a specific set of rules. Currencies were anchored to the U.S. dollar. The dollar was anchored to gold, $35 per ounce, by law. That night, Nixon severed the connection. No more gold backing, no more convertibility. The system that had stabilized the post-war world ended in a single television address. This is forgotten economy, where the systems that shape our world are finally explained. What followed wasn't chaos. There were no bank runs the next morning. Paychecks still cleared, stores still opened, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface of everyday life. Something most people wouldn't recognize for years or even decades. To understand why that moment mattered, we need to step back to 1944. World War II was ending. Allied leaders gathered at a resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new monetary system. One that would prevent the currency chaos and competitive devaluations that had destabilized the world between the wars. The solution they built was elegant in its simplicity. The U.S. dollar would serve as the global reserve currency, convertible to gold at a fixed rate, $35 per ounce. Every other major currency would peg itself to the dollar. In effect, the entire system rested on two promises: that the dollar was as good as gold, and that America had enough gold to honor that guarantee. For 2 decades, it worked. Inflation remained low. Exchange rates stayed predictable. International trade expanded. The system gave the world stability, and stability gave the world growth. But by the late 1960s, the foundation was cracking. America was spending heavily on the Vietnam War, on domestic social programs, on Cold War commitments around the globe. Dollars flowed out of the United States and into foreign hands. Central banks in Europe and Japan accumulated massive dollar reserves. Under the Bretton Woods rules, those dollars were supposed to be convertible to gold, and foreign governments began asking for exactly that. France was the most aggressive. Charles de Gaulle's government started exchanging dollars for gold in the mid-1960s, draining U.S. reserves. Other countries watched and followed. By 1971, the United States held about $10 billion in gold, but foreign central banks held over $80 billion in dollar claims. The math was simple. America couldn't keep the promise. Nixon faced a choice: tighten economic policy dramatically to defend the gold peg, or abandon the peg entirely. On August 13th, 1971, he gathered his top advisors at Camp David: Treasury Secretary John Connally, Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, and a young official named Paul Volcker. 2 days later, Nixon made the announcement. He framed it carefully. The suspension was temporary. It was meant to protect American workers from foreign speculators. It was a necessary response to unfair currency manipulation by other nations. But the decision was irreversible. Other governments protested. They called it unilateral. They called it a betrayal of the post-war order. In December 1971, the major economies tried to salvage the system with the Smithsonian Agreement, a new set of exchange rates, a slight devaluation of the dollar against gold. It lasted 15 months. By March 1973, the Bretton Woods system was officially dead. Major currencies began to float freely against one another. Gold was no longer the anchor. The dollar was no longer tied to anything tangible. The era of fiat currency had begun. Fiat comes from Latin, let it be done. It means money exists because a government declares it so. There's no commodity backing it, no legal claim to anything real. Its value rests entirely on trust. Trust in the issuing government, trust in the central bank, trust that others will continue accepting it. This wasn't a new concept. Governments had experimented with unbacked currency before. The Roman Empire debased its silver coinage over centuries. Emperors reduced the silver content of the denarius to fund military campaigns and public works. By the 3rd century, what had been a nearly pure silver coin was mostly bronze with a thin silver coating. Inflation followed, trade networks fractured, the currency collapsed alongside the empire's political stability. In 13th century China, the Mongol Yuan dynasty issued paper money backed by government decree. For a time, it circulated widely across one of the largest empires in history. But the temptation to print became irresistible. The supply expanded far beyond the economy's needs. Merchants refused the notes. Inflation surged. The system failed. The pattern is consistent. When money separates from scarcity, expansion becomes inevitable. And expansion without limits leads to devaluation. What made 1971 different was scale. When Rome's currency failed, regional economies adapted. When China's paper money collapsed, other systems filled the void. But when the dollar left gold in 1971, it pulled the entire global financial system with it. Every major currency followed the same path. The British pound, the Japanese yen, the German mark, all floated, all became fiat, all depended on central bank management rather than commodity constraint. For the first time in modern history, no major currency had a tangible anchor. Central banks gained new powers. They could expand money supplies to stimulate growth. They could lower interest rates to encourage borrowing. Governments could issue debt without immediate consequences, knowing they could refinance indefinitely. The 1970s brought inflation, oil shocks, rising prices, economic instability. But by the 1980s, central bankers believed they had learned to manage fiat systems. Paul Volcker raised interest rates sharply to crush inflation. The economy stabilized. A new era of monetary policy began. The consensus held central banks could fine-tune economies like engineers adjusting a machine. But fine-tuning required constant intervention, and intervention required constant expansion. Since 1971, global debt has grown at rates that would have been unthinkable under a gold standard. U.S. federal debt in 1970 was around $370 billion. Today, it exceeds $34 trillion. The trajectory is similar across developed economies. Debt rising faster than GDP. Deficits becoming structural, money supply expanding continuously. The system depends on this expansion. Debt must be refinanced. Growth must be sustained. Confidence must be maintained. If any of these falters, the structure becomes unstable. This isn't a moral judgment. It's a mechanical observation. Fiat systems are designed for momentum, not equilibrium. You can see the effects in purchasing power. In 1971, an ounce of gold cost $35. Today, it trades above $2,000. A house in the United States averaged around $25,000 in the early 1970s. Now, the median is over $400,000. Wages have risen, but not proportionally. For most people, the experience has been straightforward. Prices rise faster than income, savings erode, asset ownership becomes harder. This isn't unique to the United States. Once the dollar abandoned gold, every major economy faced the same dynamic. Japan, Europe, China, all operate fiat systems, all manage debt through monetary expansion, all rely on central bank credibility to hold the structure together. And credibility is fragile. History offers reminders. Weimar Germany offers the clearest example. Burdened by war reparations after World War I, the government expanded the money supply to restart the economy and meet obligations. For a brief period, production resumed and employment recovered, but inflation accelerated, first gradually, then exponentially. Within months, prices doubled weekly, then daily. Wages were paid in wheelbarrows, banknotes became wallpaper. When the trust broke, the economy collapsed, and the political consequences were catastrophic. Argentina has defaulted on its sovereign debt 9 times since independence. Each cycle follows a similar path. excessive spending, currency devaluation, inflation, collapse, restructuring. Ordinary Argentinians have learned not to save in pesos. They hold dollars, buy property, or move wealth offshore. These aren't distant cautionary tales. They're examples of what happens when fiat systems lose credibility. The difference now is interconnectedness. The global economy is more integrated than at any point in history. A currency crisis in one major economy can ripple across the entire system. And there's no fallback, no country still operating on a gold standard, no alternative reserve currency waiting in the wings. Which brings us to the present frontier, digital currency. Central banks around the world are developing digital versions of their fiat currencies, CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. They promise efficiency, instant settlement, reduced transaction costs. But they also represent a shift in control. Digital currencies allow governments to track every transaction, program restrictions into money itself, and potentially limit how and where currency can be used. Some see decentralized cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin as an alternative. Bitcoin was designed after the 2008 financial crisis with a fixed supply cap. 21 million coins, enforced by code rather than policy. In theory, it offers scarcity without central authority. But Bitcoin remains volatile, speculative, and not yet widely used for everyday transactions. It may represent a step toward a different monetary system, or it may simply be another experiment in the long history of money. The broader lesson isn't about gold or Bitcoin or any specific form of currency, it's about constraint. When money is tied to something scarce, gold, silver, a fixed algorithmic supply, governments and central banks face limits. They can't inflate indefinitely. They can't print their way out of fiscal problems. The system enforces discipline. When money becomes fiat, those constraints disappear. Flexibility increases. So does risk. The system can respond to crises more quickly, but it can also expand without natural boundaries, and expansion without limits eventually creates distortions. This isn't a call to return to the gold standard. The global economy is too complex, too interconnected, too dependent on monetary flexibility for that to be practical. But it is a reminder that 1971 wasn't just a policy change. It was a structural shift, one that redefined how money works, how governments operate, and how ordinary people experience economic life. Most people never think about this. Money feels permanent, natural, unchanging. But money is a human invention. It has taken many forms across history: cowrie shells, silver coins, paper notes, digital entries. Each form reflects the society that uses it, and each form eventually changes. The day money stopped being real wasn't August 15th, 1971. Money has never been real in the way we imagine. It's always been a system of trust, rules, and agreed-upon value. What changed in 1971 was the nature of that trust. It shifted from trust in a commodity to trust in institutions. Central banks, governments, the continuity of the system itself. That trust has held for over 50 years. How much longer it holds depends on choices being made now, about debt, about inflation, about the balance between flexibility and discipline. History doesn't repeat, but the patterns remain visible for those willing to look.